What a wild day in the NHL that is happening right now, everybody. And that means it is time for the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast with everything that you need to know happening around the world of the NHL, fantasy impacts, trades from the Ottawa Senators acquiring a big name in Alex DeBrincat, Kris Letang re-signs with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and everything in between from the wild world of the NHL. On today's episode, my friends, let's get it.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Buckle up, everybody, because the wild season of the NHL news reel is upon us. Welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, Friday's edition. Alongside my co-host, Mr. Steele Roden. It is your boy, Big Flip Livingstone. And thank you for making us your first listen every single day. You know where to find us across all platforms you find your favorite and hottest content, including YouTube. So make sure you head out there and smash that subscribe button. And don't miss a single episode or coverage of all the draft news coming out of this week. And Steele, on today's episode, my friend, there is no shortage of awesome topics, including a big trade from the Ottawa Senators acquiring Alex DeBrincat. We're going to start there, but make sure you tune in to the entirety of today's episode because we're talking about Kris Letang. We're talking about his fantasy impact, the big signing of 6 years. Maybe that's a bit much. Lots of rumblings out of the Toronto Maple Leafs, goaltending extraordinaire, and Steele, another big trade from the Colorado Avalanche, acquiring Alexandar Georgiev. I'm all kinds of fired up on today's episode, Steele. So I want you to just take this away with your take on what this means for the Ottawa Senators, because this ain't no joke here with Alex DeBrincat. I know that you're a big fan of his in terms of fantasy value, because why not? Back-to-back 30-plus goal seasons? Yeah, I think this is a big deal for the Ottawa Senators.
Yeah, I'm huge on Alex DeBrincat. I actually drafted him in the second round last year in my fantasy league, 28th overall. 41 goals, 78 points, a career high for him this past season with the Chicago Blackhawks. But let's break down the actual trade right now. So Chicago they got the 7th and 39th overall pick in 2022 and a 2024 third round pick. And of course, the Ottawa Senators get Alex DeBrincat. I think this is absolutely huge for the Ottawa Senators. Just adding more young superstar into their lineup with already the young guys they already have on this team. Tim Stützle, Brady Tkachuk, sorry, I'm blanking on the names right now.
Drake Batherson, Josh Norris.
Josh Norris, sorry, excuse me for that. But they got a boatload of young talent. Thomas Chabot as well on the blue line. So adding another young guy, Alex DeBrincat, who's only 24 years old. Again, he's put up 40 goals twice now in his career, so we know that he can put the puck in the back of the net. He's just an absolute star, and this was a huge move and necessary move for the Ottawa Senators for their future and be actual contenders.
I think this is a big step forward, and what I want to actually do is show you a bit of love for quickly checking me when I said off air that this starts to tilt that division in, when it comes to Ottawa's ranking in I'm drawing a blank on the goddamn division right now, but the Atlantic Division, there we go. You know what I'm talking about. And I think what the point that you made, though, is that the Ottawa Senators still do have a lot of holes. But man, is this not a good step forward? Because now all of a sudden you can roll two very dangerous offensive lines that include the likes of a couple of 40-goal scorer potentials. And I am throwing Josh Norris in that 40-goal potential. He is that kind of goal scorer. So I think now the Ottawa Senators, with the playmaker of Drake Batherson, even I'm going to put in Alex Formanton, who's right there on the doorstep, in my opinion. So there is a lot of options for Ottawa up front. Obviously, as you said again to me earlier, goaltending situation is very, very spotty. At best, Anton Forsberg showed that he could be that guy for a little bit of the season. But anyway, another intriguing thing here to look at, Steele, I think, is the start of the dismantling of this Chicago Blackhawks team. And I'm wondering what you think about, Yes, they got a pretty good return from the Ottawa Senators with the picks. But do you now expect another move, a.k.a. are we going to see Patty Kane on the move sooner than later?
Well, just to touch on the goalie situation in Ottawa, I think there were flashes of great hockey from Gustafsson and Forsberg. But I think if Ottawa can actually go out and get a true number one goaltender, they could be a very dangerous team in the Atlantic Division. So they have a couple of holes to fill, but there are, up front, they're absolutely stacked right now. But yeah, for the Chicago Blackhawks, this is not the route that their veterans and their leaders wanted to go down. And that was very clear. That was made very clear from Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews last year or a couple of years ago that they did not want to go through a rebuild, and they still believe that they can continue and contend for a deep playoff run and even a Stanley Cup. But that does not seem to be the case right now after trading Alex DeBrincat, probably one of their second best forward behind Patrick Kane. This really puts the question in my mind is what is their does the future hold for Toews and Kane now? Because we heard about the rumors swirling around Patrick Kane last year. Was he going to be traded at any point? So now I'm thinking to myself, could we start to see Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews potentially be moved? Like they just got Seth Jones and signed him to an 8-year deal. Really weird move from Chicago if they were trying to be contenders, because you and I talked about this a couple episodes ago. This draft is really good for depth players. They're not going to get they're not going to get a superstar here.
Exactly. And that's why it's, they're two good picks. If you want to look at it for the grand scheme of things, a 7th overall and an early second, and maybe they can make something of that. But like you said, Steele, for the draft that they moved into, and maybe it's because they knew at $6.4 million for Alex DeBrincat on the last year of his deal that he just wasn't going to be. And again, I don't really understand why you wouldn't want a guy like that as a part of the future, but maybe they just did not think that they were going to be able to see eye to eye on a contract. I don't know.
Yeah.
This news just happened, right? So we're going to learn probably a little bit more about this situation as it shakes out. Lots of fun things going on in this NHL world on draft day. Thank you for being here with us on the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. And realistically, Steele, I look at it this way. The Chicago Blackhawks are obviously a team that needs to find its identity. And it's interesting that they didn't want to include a kid that obviously has what it takes and has the chemistry with Patrick Kane, a guy who said he wanted to still remain a part of the organization. So there's, like you said, there's some question marks here with this move from the Chicago Blackhawks side of things. But my goodness, do I like this for the Ottawa Senators? Does this immediately make them a playoff team? I don't think so. But does it make them a serious offensive threat? Most definitely. Because now, and they know the teams that they're going up against now in the East, like the Toronto Maple Leafs, Carolina Hurricanes, New York Rangers. Some of these teams are very potent offensively. So they had to up that game. They do that in a very big way. And I'm very excited to see, because now immediately, Steele, Drake Batherson, Brady Tkachuk, these guys up there in that top 6, we already like these players. I love them. Now you add in the mix of Alex DeBrincat, I'm going to see the assist number go up on about all those players, because the cat's popping at least 30 or 40, most definitely. So anyway, let's go to break here, because there is a lot more to talk about. Sorry for blabbing on there, Steele, because I want to get your take on Georgiev, Letang, the Leafs rumors in the goal crease, and lots more, because I'm jonesing to sprinkle a big bet. And where you need to take a look at those is betonline.net, your number one source for all your sports betting needs, info, and more. Find all the latest developments, including all the coverage of the 2022 MLB season. And don't forget that BetOnline is your continued source for all your wagering info, including bets, esports, and scores. BetOnline is the number one spot for all of your podcasts and news this season, and it is the fastest and easiest way to check on all of your favorite events, including MMA, combat sports, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to check out all the trends and action. BetOnline, it's where the game starts.
Thank you for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen in every single day. The NHL draft day and is continuing today, and our team of local hosts and draft experts are breaking it down with insights and analysis for every first round pick. Subscribe to your favorite Locked On podcast and fantasy hockey podcast for all the latest breakdowns on the NHL draft. And let's get right into the other player for picks trade that happened today, Flip. Alexandar Georgiev getting traded to the reigning Stanley Cup champion Colorado Avalanche, and the New York Rangers get in return a 3rd and 5th round pick in this 2022 draft and a 3rd round pick in next year's draft 2023. So for me, I think this opens up a lot of doors for both teams. Yeah. I really looked at this from a Colorado Avalanche standpoint because in my opinion, this is a lot more serious for them than it was for New York. Obviously, they got some picks in this trade, but earlier this morning, Darcy Kuemper's agent and Joe Sakic, yesterday morning, Darcy Kuemper's agent and Joe Sakic were talking yesterday morning. They didn't get close to an agreement, but it was stated that they wanted to talking about this and get a deal done. And pretty much an hour or maybe a couple of hours later, Georgiev was traded to the Colorado Avalanche. So that just made it very clear that Darcy Kuemper was not going to be coming back to the Colorado Avalanche. It looks like he's going to be on the market. He's going to be with a new team next season. And I think this opens a big door for Georgiev and Pavel Francouz.
This is one of those very intriguing moves, Steele, because first of all, like you said, on the surface, the picks might not mean that much right away, especially when you're moving a guy like Georgiev, who is going to have the chance to make an impact, I think, in Colorado. But the fact that they did have to pay the price of those 3 draft picks for a backup goaltender that doesn't have too much of, like, don't get me wrong, I like Georgiev as a backup, but something tells me there that these people know that the quality in Georgiev might be more than what we've seen. So I'm intrigued to see how that shakes out for sure. But of course, like you said, and again, you're hitting the nail on the head, pal, so props to you, is what does this open up now? What does this mean now for the peripheral moves that will happen mostly for the Colorado Avalanche? You're right. Does Darcy Kuemper, in my opinion, Steele, I think I'm with you. I'm seeing a departure from Colorado for Darcy Kuemper. I think both you and I are also on the same page, or maybe you disagreed with me. For some reason, Darcy Kuemper just feels like the kind of goalie that Kyle Dubas is going to go after. Yeah. And I know that the Toronto Maple Leafs have been linked to Marc-Andre Fleury, and we're going to discuss that coming up around the break along with Kris Letang. So please stay tuned for that. But Kuemper just screams like one of those guys that they're going to look at too, Steele. So I think I could almost see the Colorado Avalanche going with some sort of combination of Georgiev and Francouz, and mostly because I think it speaks to the quality of how good this team is and how good the front office thinks they are. So I'm with you, man. I think there's a lot more to come after this move has been made.
Well, that's exactly what I have written down here in my notes. Like they're most likely going to be splitting the time in the crease for the Colorado Avalanche. Georgiev, he's 26 years old.
Yeah.
Looking at he's always had a winning record, but his stats have gone down every single year in the last 5 years. He started out in the NHL with a .918 save percentage. Last year, he had an .898 save percentage. Every year, it's gone down by .005. His goals against average is at 2.94, so it's not great. It's not terrible, but it's pretty much 3 goals a game. But the upside to him is he's 26 years old. He was sort of living in the shadow of, the uprise of Igor Shesterkin.
Yes.
He was playing mostly at the end of a back-to-back where his team is, maybe they're on the road or something, but that plays a part into it as well.
I think that's just it though, Steele, not to take over. That's just it, because I think when you're the New York Rangers, and we've talked a lot about Igor Shesterkin's quality, maybe you get a bit too comfortable with having that type of goalie. And then when a guy who's even just a little bit not as good, this is what you have happen. So I think that's a good point that you're alluding to there.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason why we can see a split in the crease with Pavel Francouz, because looking at the same thing, he's 32 years old, so he's 6 years older than Georgiev. He's only been in the league for 2 years, but he has an outstanding record, and he has great goals against average, goal against average, and save percentage. So we just saw him put on a flash in the, when Darcy Kuemper was out with injury in the postseason. He was great then too. Every time he stepped in last year and this year when Kuemper was down, he played great as well. So I think this is a great opportunity for both of these goalies to battle it out to see who can become the starting goaltender. But they're most likely going to be splitting this year. And both these goalies now become a hot commodity in fantasy leagues.
Very interesting little tidbit that you bring up there, my friend, because honestly, 15, 10, and 2 for Georgiev last year, factoring in the conversation that we just had in terms of when it's almost like in baseball when the ace goes in game 1 of a series, and then game 2, the second starter just gets absolutely lit up because, they're used to that quality. There's something to be said about the situations that Georgiev probably got thrown into following a performance from Shesterkin this year that he did. 15, 10, and 2 from a backup, though, is something that you want to keep your eye on.
Yeah.
And, I mentioned to you off air that I made a trade today in my Dynasty League to acquire a goalie in Marc-Andre Fleury. Dealing with goalies at the best of times in fantasy hockey is like dealing with a hand grenade without a pin. You really have to get lucky and make sure you chuck that bad boy when it's an opportune time. So looking at what you just said with Francouz and Georgiev in Colorado, if that happens to be the situation and Kuemper moves on, oh my goodness, people, you better run out there and try and grab at least one of those guys, because with the group that they have in front of them, I'm pretty sure Steele and I could hold down a decent goals against if we were in the cage, if that was the case, if you know what I'm saying. But I want to hit you with this question, Steele, before we wrap up this segment, is I know Darcy Kuemper is in line for probably some sort of payday.
Yeah.
But what kind of deal do you see him getting? Because I believe he's 33 years old, maybe 34. I don't know. But I would be wary, especially as, both of us are Leafs fans. If that deal is anything more than 2 years, which he's probably looking for 3 or 4, I'm a little bit nervous about acquiring a guy like Darcy Kuemper.
Yeah, I would be nervous actually as well. He's actually 32 years old, turning 33 this year. But yeah, I would be nervous as well. And the reason why is I'm sort of connecting it to what happened with Philip Grubauer last year when he left Colorado and he got his payday. And I understand that he went to a new franchise, a team that had just been put in to the National Hockey League. So I understand it's going to take some time and it's going to be a work in progress. Obviously, they went a different route than what the Vegas Golden Knights did. And I respect that because, it's obviously hard coming in as a new team into an organization or the NHL like this.
Yeah.
But that's what I connected to is like Philip Grubauer left and he was just absolutely terrible this season. He was not a fantasy goalie you could hold on to. And I'm not saying that Darcy Kuemper is going to be that bad. It really does depend on the team that he goes to because, if he were to go to a team like the Ottawa Senators we just talked about, could he be that guy to really put them, make a push for the playoffs or a playoff spot, make potentially a deep run?
Maybe.
That could be the case. But for me, for a deal with Darcy Kuemper at 32 years old, I think a 3 to 4 year deal is probably good enough. That's what I would be looking at as a GM. I wouldn't be looking at anything past 3 or 4. And I would be looking around 5.5, 6.5 million for that.
He did just win a cup. We do know, though, that the goalie market is potentially at an all-time thin margin in terms of quality options. And we're going to talk about that actually coming up right around the break. So I'm going to save a few of my bullets for that because Darcy Kuemper is a name. Jack Campbell is a name. We know that there's a lot of conversations happening. Marc-Andre Fleury. Let's talk about that after the break, Steele. And guys, just make sure that you keep it tapped to the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast because I'm not messing around when I say Steele and I are in the lab cooking up some amazing off-season content to make sure you are primed and ready to go for draft day and that you are crushing it. So keep it locked and run out there and hit that subscribe button right now. Drop us a comment, leave us a rating, good or bad. We're trying to get there, so hit us up. We appreciate that love. And my bad, Steele, I've been talking a lot this episode. Please take it away.
Hey, I love to hear you talk, man. I love your opinions. Don't worry about it whatsoever. But
appreciate you.
I do need to let everyone know about Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now almost impossible for your local chain auto parts store to have what you need in stock. Why would you even endure the often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, and it takes forever. It can be very, very frustrating, and it's time consuming. So save your time, save your money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership? They have everything you could ask for: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that Flip and I sent you. Amazing selections, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need from rockauto.com. Thank you for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I, and make sure that you are hitting the subscribe and the follow button and getting all the latest Locked On Fantasy Hockey content. All we have to offer this summer: fantasy hockey content, top 5 mock drafts, all coming soon. But let's get into the big news, the also big news that happened today besides the 2 trades. Kris Letang signing a monster deal, 6-year, $36 million contract, remaining with the Pittsburgh Penguins. I'm going to throw it over to you first because I have a little bit to say about this, but I really want to hear your opinion on Kris Letang staying with the Penguins.
Yeah, hit me for sure, because there's a few ways that we can look at this. And right off the bat, 6 years seems like a long time for a 35-year-old guy who has had a number of very serious injuries in his career. That's something that I think has been well documented with Kris Letang. And I'm really not trying to take away from this guy's career, because I wanted to throw this out there for you, Steele. He is number 1 in Penguins all-time defenseman in games, goals, assists, points, power play goals, power play points, game-winning goals, and is only in second in plus-minus behind a Hall of Famer in Larry Murphy. He is also coming off a career high of 68 points. So those points give you a lot of ammunition if you're Kris Letang's agent in the negotiating room at the table. So I understand why the number is that high, but I don't understand the term here, Steele. And I think this is one of the things that, and I'll throw it right back over to you because I know you have a take here. I think they were a bit handcuffed, thinking how thin that blue line is in Pittsburgh. If they don't bring back Kris Letang, I don't even need to go to the lineup depth chart. Immediately, it becomes very concerning in Pittsburgh. So I think this is almost a must deal, but a little bit of not an overpay, but maybe too much term. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's too much term. My first reaction to this was like, this guy thinks that he's Doctor Strange with the time stone, and he's foreseen the future, and he thinks that he can play up to 41 years old, which maybe he can, but the injury scares that he's had in the past really concerns me up to when he gets to 39, 40, 41.
Yes.
The first 3 years, I like the deal, but again, I think it's a term issue with me. Obviously, the stats and all those things that you just listed off. His accomplishments, the 3 Stanley Cups with Pittsburgh, like obviously that plays a part into his point, the point that he was making to Pittsburgh when negotiating. Look, he's going to be playing with the Pittsburgh Penguins for 22 seasons once this contract is over. Like, that is a long time. So congrats to him for getting a big payday and not fumbling the bag, I guess you can say. $36 million for 6 years. Great deal for Kris Letang. I'm not sure how it's going to affect Pittsburgh at the last 3 years of that deal. And I guess we'll have to wait and see because, again, I'm just not really sure how he's going to be when he's 39, 40, 41.
For the sake of next season, Kris Letang, in my opinion, does remain a top fantasy option for offensive defensemen. But like you said, we're talking fantasy, and the Pittsburgh Penguins are talking potential looking for a legacy. So there are some interesting ways that you can look at how this contract might shake out. 10 goals, 58 assists for 68 points in 78 games last year for Kris Letang is something that you can't ignore, and he will definitely be a top target when it comes to defensemen in our mock drafts. But the deal raises some question marks. But again, maybe the Pittsburgh Penguins front office, Ron Hextall, Brian Burke, a little handcuffed here in terms of needing to pay this man to secure something on their back end. And I'll point this out to you, Steele, in terms of his longevity track record. aside from the shortened season, the man has played one full 82 NHL game season in his 15 years in the NHL. And I know this is harder to do year in and year out, but there's something to be said about a guy who has a couple of half season in the books here because of significant injury. That's not something you can blame on him. That's not something we're going to hold against Kris Letang. But it's a factor you have to consider if you and I are going to sit here and talk about the deal that he just got. Because, yes, good for him, 6 years. He secured the rest of his career. But also, what kind of position does that put him in mentally for next season? Maybe that's one of those boomer bust situations, because also the Kris Letang factor when you draft him, it's a very real one that you might be dealing with him on your IR for a good chunk of the year.
That's what I was just about to say, that I always factor in on not just Kris Letang, but any player I'm about to draft for my fantasy league. How often are they injured? How durable are they? Am I going to have to deal with injuries? That's a big case that a big problem you have to deal with during the season. And obviously you can't control that, but it's something you have to think about. And real quick, before we move on to the Toronto Maple Leafs, I do want to mention, did you see that Evgeny Malkin comment on that photo from the Pittsburgh Penguins?
I did not.
They released a picture, or their Twitter account released a statement on Twitter, obviously, and basically just said that, he's back, he's staying with us, 6 years, $36 million. Evgeny Malkin comments back at it. He's like, "Congrats, man. I hope I don't have to play against you next year." Wow. I thought that was absolutely hilarious.
Hey, there are rumblings out there. There's also a lot of and we can save this for another show because we're not confirmed on some of these rumblings out of Russia, but there's a lot of very intriguing things happening in the league with Russian players. And for obvious reasons, their world has been turned upside down over the last year for political reasons. And I have a feeling, Steele, we haven't heard the end of this Evgeny Malkin saga. He came back with something like 20 goals and 22 assists in half a season last year. He still has it. That's a whole other episode. I want to wrap up the show very quickly by talking about some of the rumblings coming out of Toronto. We can talk about Jack Campbell and the interest of teams on another time, because I think we can focus on the Toronto Maple Leafs needs for this short segment here very quickly. What do you think, Steele? Like, brass tacks, very simply. Do you like the idea of Marc-Andre Fleury being the guy next year in Toronto, if that is indeed a truth to this rumor, which it seems to be?
I like the idea. I just don't think it happens. I don't think they have the cap space or the money to afford Marc-Andre Fleury. So short and sweet, I just don't think it happens.
This is why more and more, man, and maybe it's because I'm just drinking the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast Kool-Aid, but I seriously see them bringing in Darcy Kuemper on some sort of cheap I see a 2-year deal or something like that for maybe something that, because they're running out of options. And I think from what we've heard about Marc-Andre Fleury is he also isn't looking for a 1 or 2 year. He wants something that is basically the last contract of his career. And I think he's going to get it from someone because he has been more than good enough over the last handful of years. He's got the cup rings to prove it as well. So I think, there is going to be a lot more conversation that you and I have about this because we know the news here is not done. Teams are circling around Jack Campbell. The Leafs are circling around a number of goalies because as it stands, is it Eric Kallgren has to start in net? That's all kinds of trouble.
I'll tell you what, whoever the goalie is, the starting goaltender for the Toronto Maple Leafs this season, obviously, if he's been playing prior, not Eric Kallgren, but has been playing in the league for a long time, whether it's Darcy Kuemper, Ville Husso, whoever it is, that goalie is going to be a top fantasy goalie in the league that they're going to be grabbed very, very quickly. So you got to keep your eyes posted on definitely the Toronto Maple Leafs and the goalie situation, as well as the Edmonton Oilers, teams that are looking for starting goaltenders, because when they become the starting goaltender, they're playing the most games, and with the team that they have in front of them, they're getting a ton of wins that we just saw from both Edmonton and Toronto. So those guys are definitely going to be hot commodities as well.
Keep your eyes on those guys. Keep your eyes on these guys, Mr. Steele Roden and your boy Big Flip Livingstone on the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. And exactly what Steele just said, teeing up some of these intriguing goalie names, teeing up some of these offseason targets that you want to have your eyes on. We will be breaking every single thing down. X factors, mock drafts, under the radar sleepers. I am all kinds of fired up, Steele, and I'm looking forward to the off-season content. So go out there and hit that subscribe button and do not sleep or slip. Let's get it.
Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. It's free and available on all podcast platforms, just like this podcast right here. So please make sure you hit the subscribe, hit the follow button. You'll get all the latest content of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning Eastern Time. Thank you so much again for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day. Good luck with all your bets out there, and we shall see you back here again on Monday.